Good morning, Will. Thanks for
Hi,
coming this
Karen.
morning for our DKJ Health Hub vlog on maximising rental income. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. So my name's Will Ellis. I'm the managing director here at BW Healthcare Surveyors. So we are a specialist firm of surveyors in primary care, and we help practices all over the UK with various premises related matters, from things like putting a lease in place or market valuations for partnership changes, but also notional rent reviews and lease rent reviews, which is, I know, something we're going to be talking about today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Will. So one of our most frequently asked questions is about how can practices maximise rental income? So how would you answer that question?
Okay, fine. I mean, it's something that we get asked quite a lot as well. I mean, I think certainly in the current market, when budgets are so tight, costs are increasing, and certainly rental income isn't perhaps going up in line with that. We frequently get asked that question. I think the biggest thing when you're in an owner-occupied practice, so when you own the premises, the best way to maximise the kind of the rental income you're receiving is through your notional rent. So practices will receive notional rent on a monthly basis for occupying the premises, and it's just making sure that that rent is at its maximum level. The best way of doing that is using companies like ourselves, an independent surveyor, just to check it every time it's reviewed and make sure it's correct and in line with the current market. Make sure that perhaps no mistakes have been made. Make sure the surgery's been measured correctly. We've had experiences of going down to practices where they are wanting us to review their notional rent, and we've gone out to visit the premises, and it turns out the surgery is over two floors. There's a ground floor and there's a first floor, but they've actually only historically been reimbursed for that ground floor. So actually, in that instance, their notional rent doubled. So it went from 20,000 to 40,000 pounds a year. So I think getting somebody independent to come out and just check that, to make sure that the assessment that's done by the NHS and the ICB is correct, is in line with the current market, and no mistakes have been made. Just simple things like counting the number of car parking spaces they have. The amount of times we go out to a surgery and they're getting reimbursed for 10 car parking spaces when there's 15, or 3 car parking spaces and there's a car park at the back that's just been completely ignored for years. So little things like that are really important. And I think the first stage of that is making sure that the CMR1 forms are filled in correctly. So the review process, when you have your notional rent reviewed, is reviewed every 3 years, and the first stage of that is practices will receive CMR1 forms to fill in. And it's just making sure that those CMR1 forms are filled in correctly, because that is the basis of what the NHS will use to assess the notional rent. So again, just getting independent advice at that early stage is really important. So the notional rent is probably the biggest way to maximise the rental income, but then there's other things as well. If practices are renting space out to PCN staff, which is a big thing at the moment, that isn't reimbursable space, and it's just making sure that the PCN are actually paying rental income for that space. Or if they're renting space out to a pharmacist or a chiropractor, whatever it may be, it's making sure that they're actually receiving rental income for that space, and making sure that potentially there are leases in place as well, to make sure that rental income is guaranteed. Other things to think about perhaps is just making the most of any space as well. So if there's any spare space in the surgery, which always seems to make practices laugh, because I think it's few and far between that there is any spare space. But if practices have any spare space that perhaps isn't reimbursed, one of the big things at the moment is a lot of pharmacies are exiting practices. So a lot of pharmacies just aren't finding it financially beneficial to be implanted into surgery. So when those pharmacies leave, practices are left with this spare space, and they don't really know what to do with it. So it's looking at ways in which you can perhaps get an alternative therapist to perhaps rent that space out, or even contacting the ICB to look if you can start using that for GMS purposes and start actually receiving rental income for it as well. And then the last thing to think about in terms of rental income is probably look at ways of upgrading and improving the surgery. So the more modern your surgery is, the higher the notional rent is you're going to receive, and then also extending the surgery as well. Obviously, the bigger the surgery, the more reimbursement you're going to receive for that. So looking at upgrades and improvements, modernizing the surgery and extending the surgery is going to potentially increase the rental income as well. Just a quick thing on that: if practices are looking at wanting to extend, it's making sure that they seek approval from the NHS for reimbursement for that, because that is by no means guaranteed. And again, it's why it's so important getting companies like ourselves involved at that early stage.
Gosh, so there are different ways that practices can maximise their income through the premises, which some of the ones I've not even thought of as well. So that's been really interesting. Thank you, Will. So just in terms of some of the practices that might be interested in learning a bit more, how can you help with this process?
So it's what we specialise in, really. Certainly from a rental income perspective, certainly from a notional rent perspective, is when practices receive their, what we call their district valuers report, their notional rent proposal. It's a case of just sending it through to us. They can send that through to us. We can review it. We can make sure we can actually do a free initial assessment for them. We can check internally what surgeries in their locality, in their area are receiving. Make sure it's in line with what other similar practices are receiving, and then we can also, following that free assessment, we'll arrange for one of our surveyors to come and visit the premises, measure the surgery, and complete a full valuation effectively of the rental income to make sure that the rent they're receiving is in line with the current market, and just make sure that no mistakes have been made. And we can do similar things, not just for the notional rent, but for the other occupants in the surgery as well. So if they're renting their space out to a pharmacy, we can review the pharmacy rent, make sure that's in line with the current market, and the similar things with other occupants in the premises as well. So yeah, I think it's probably just picking the phone up and speaking to us, really. If practice feel that they're not getting the right rent, is just give us a call and we can talk them through the process and talk about how we can help.
Amazing. And your contact details are on our DKJ Health Hub. So if any practices are wanting your support, just to either email you or, like you said, call you as well, using the number that's on the DKJ Health Hub. Well,
perfect.
That's been enlightening. Thank you so much, Will. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure people will be in touch with you talking about how they can maximise their income as well. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks, Karen. Have a great day.